You walk into challenging situations already defeated in your mind, expecting failure before you even begin. Every difficult conversation, every high-stakes presentation, every moment when you need to show strength, you're battling your own doubt instead of the actual challenge in front of you. I am Miyamoto Musashi, the legendary samurai who never lost a single duel in over 60 battles, and I mastered the art of mental invincibility long before my sword ever left its sheath. What I discovered about cultivating an undefeated mindset will transform how you approach every challenge in your life, giving you the inner certainty that turns obstacles into victories before the battle even begins. The same mental discipline that made me invincible in mortal combat can make you unstoppable in any arena where you need to perform under pressure. But first, like this video, subscribe for more warrior wisdom, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready to develop an undefeated spirit. Let me take you back to where my undefeated mind was forged. I was born in Harima province in 1584, the son of a samurai named Musashi. My father was skilled with the sword, but he was also absent, always traveling, always fighting, always somewhere else when I needed him most. When I was 7 years old, I carved my first sword from bamboo with nothing but a small knife. It was crude, unbalanced, but it was mine. That wooden sword taught me my first lesson about the undefeated mind. You must create your own weapons. My father died when I was young, and with his death came my first real understanding of mortality. I stood at his funeral and realized that every man, no matter how skilled, eventually faces a final opponent. But in that moment of grief, I made a decision that would shape everything that followed. I decided that while I lived, I would never know defeat, not because I was the strongest or the fastest, but because I would train my mind to be unbreakable. At 13, I fought my first real duel against a man named Arima Kihei. He was older, experienced, confident. Everyone expected him to destroy the boy with the wooden sword. But here's what I learned in that first battle. The fight is won or lost in the mind before the first blow is struck. I spent 3 days before our duel visualizing every possible attack he could make. I saw myself moving, responding, countering. By the time we faced each other, I had already won the battle 100 times in my mind. When Kihei made his first move, it was exactly what I had prepared for. My body moved without thought. My wooden sword found its mark, and he fell. The crowd was silent. They had just witnessed something they couldn't understand. How preparation and mental discipline could overcome experience and strength. That victory taught me that confidence is not arrogance. Confidence is the natural result of thorough preparation, meeting unshakable mental discipline. From that day forward, I never entered any challenge, whether combat or conversation, without first winning it in my mind. I learned to see victory not as something I hoped for, but as something I had already achieved through mental preparation. The bamboo sword I carved as a child still sits in my memory as the symbol of self-reliance. You cannot wait for someone else to give you the tools for victory. You must create them yourself, with whatever materials you have available. Your mind is the greatest weapon you will ever possess, but like any weapon, it must be sharpened daily through discipline and challenge. This is where your own undefeated mind begins, with the recognition that victory is a mental state that you choose, not a circumstance that happens to you. After my first victory, I could have stayed home and built a reputation as a local champion. I could have opened a dojo, attracted students, lived comfortably, but comfort is the enemy of the undefeated mind. So at 16, I left everything behind and became what we call a Musha Shugo, a warrior pilgrim. I took nothing but a travel pack, worn sandals, and my swords. For the next 20 years, I wandered Japan seeking the strongest opponents I could find. I slept on hard ground, ate whatever I could find or afford, and faced challenge after challenge. People thought I was crazy. Why choose hardship when you could have ease? Why seek stronger enemies when you could defeat weaker ones? But this is what they didn't understand. The undefeated mind is not built in comfort. It is forged in difficulty. Every night I slept on rocky ground. My body learned to find rest anywhere. Every day I walked until my feet bled. My spirit learned endurance. Every meal that was too small or too cold, my mind learned that it could function regardless of circumstances. This was not suffering for its own sake. This was training for mental invincibility, you see. Most people train only when they feel like it, only when conditions are perfect. They practice their skills in ideal situations and wonder why they crumble when faced with real pressure. I trained my mind to be strong, especially when conditions were terrible. When you can think clearly while hungry, tired, and cold, thinking clearly in a boardroom or during a difficult conversation becomes effortless. I deliberately sought opponents who were stronger, more experienced, more skilled than me. Each victory against a superior opponent taught me something new about the power of mental preparation over physical advantage. I learned that technique matters less than timing, that speed matters less than positioning, and that strength matters less than the unshakable belief that you will find a way to win. The worn sandals in my pack became my reminder that the path to mastery requires movement, not comfort. Every step on that hard road was building something inside me that no comfortable life could ever create. When you choose the difficult path by choice, you develop the mental resilience to handle any difficulty that life forces upon you. I remember sleeping in mountain caves during winter storms, using meditation to keep my mind focused while my body shivered. I remember walking for days without proper food, training my concentration to remain sharp despite physical discomfort. These experiences taught me that the mind is separate from the body's complaints, and that with proper discipline, the mind can remain undefeated regardless of physical circumstances. This is your training ground today. Stop seeking the easy path. Stop avoiding discomfort. The challenges you face in your career, your relationships, your personal growth, these are not obstacles to overcome, but opportunities to strengthen your undefeated mind. Embrace the hard ground. It is the foundation upon which mental invincibility is built. Fear is the great destroyer of the undefeated mind. I have seen skilled warriors lose to inferior opponents because fear clouded their judgment. I have watched brilliant strategists make foolish decisions because fear whispered lies in their ears. But here is what most people misunderstand about courage. It is not the absence of fear. It is action taken despite fear. In my years of wandering and dueling, I learned to dissect fear like a physician dissects a body. Fear has anatomy. It has predictable patterns, recognizable symptoms, and most importantly, it has weaknesses that can be exploited. When I faced my most dangerous opponents, I felt fear. The difference was that I had trained my mind to use fear as information rather than let fear use me as its victim. Fear tells you that something important is at stake. This is valuable information. Fear heightens your senses and sharpens your reflexes. This is a useful physical response. But fear also whispers lies, that you are not prepared, that you will fail, that you should retreat. These whispers must be silenced through mental discipline. I developed a method for transforming nervous energy into focused power. Before each duel, I would feel the familiar tightening in my chest, the quickening of my heartbeat. Instead of fighting these sensations, I learned to welcome them as signs that my body was preparing for peak performance. I would breathe deeply and tell myself, this energy is my weapon. This alertness is my advantage. The key insight came to me during a duel with a master swordsman in Kyoto. As we faced each other, I noticed he was trying to appear calm, to suppress his nervousness. But this suppression created tension in his movements. Meanwhile, I accepted my fear, acknowledged it, and then chose to act in spite of it. My acceptance made me fluid where his denial made him rigid. This fluidity gave me the victory. True fearlessness is not recklessness. The reckless warrior charges blindly into danger without proper assessment. The truly fearless warrior sees the danger clearly, feels the appropriate fear, and then acts with precision and intelligence. Recklessness gets you killed. Fearlessness gets you victory. I trained my mind to see opportunity where others saw only threat. Every opponent's aggression became an opening to exploit. Every dangerous situation became a chance to demonstrate superior mental discipline. When you change your perception of threatening situations from things that could destroy me to opportunities to prove my undefeated mind, you transform fear from an enemy into an ally. The mental exercises I developed eliminate hesitation. In critical moments, I would spend hours visualizing challenging scenarios, practicing my mental response until it became automatic. When the real moment arrived, my mind was already prepared with the correct response. Hesitation is the child of unpreparedness. Preparation eliminates hesitation. Remember this: fear is not your enemy. Fear is simply information that requires your attention. The undefeated mind acknowledges fear, processes its message, and then acts with wisdom and courage. The greatest battles are fought and won before the first sword is drawn. I learned this during my duel with Sasaki Kojiro on Ganru Island. But the principle became clear to me years earlier when I began studying the art of reading an opponent's mind through their body. Most warriors focus only on technique, the angle of the blade, the positioning of feet, the timing of strikes. But technique is merely the visible expression of what happens in the mind. I learned to read the invisible battle that occurs in an opponent's thoughts before it manifests in their actions. This ability gave me an advantage that no amount of technical skill could overcome. When I faced an opponent, I would study them in the moments before combat began. The way they held their shoulders revealed their confidence level. The rhythm of their breathing showed their mental state. The focus of their eyes told me where they planned to attack. Most importantly, the subtle tension in their posture revealed whether they believed they would win or lose. Here is what I discovered. Most battles are decided in the first 3 seconds, not by what happens with the weapons, but by what happens in the minds of the combatants. The warrior who believes he will lose has already lost, regardless of his skill level. The warrior who knows he will win has already won, even if he faces a superior technician. I remember a duel with a famous sword master who had defeated dozens of opponents. When we faced each other, his technique was flawless, his reputation intimidating. But in those crucial first moments, I saw something in his eyes that he probably didn't know was there: doubt. He was wondering if his reputation was deserved. He was questioning whether he was as good as everyone believed. That doubt was like a crack in armor. Once I saw it, I knew exactly how to exploit it. I maintained perfect eye contact and let my certainty show in my posture. I stood not like someone preparing to fight, but like someone who had already won and was simply waiting for the opponent to realize it. This psychological positioning created pressure that began breaking down his mental defenses before we exchanged a single blow. Body language reveals mental state with perfect accuracy because the mind and body are connected in ways that most people cannot consciously control. When someone is uncertain, their movements become slightly hesitant. When someone is overconfident, they telegraph their intentions through excessive tension. When someone is truly prepared, they achieve a state of relaxed alertness that is unmistakable. This skill applies beyond combat to every interaction, where there is conflict or negotiation. In business meetings, personal confrontations, or any situation where you need to assess another person's true state of mind, learn to read the invisible signals they cannot hide. Their true thoughts will always leak through their posture, breathing, and eye movements. Train your warrior's instinct to see beyond surface appearances. The real battle is always happening at a level deeper than what meets the eye. During my years of meditation at various temples, I would often sit beside the ancient sundials and contemplate the nature of timing. I watched how the shadow moved with perfect precision, never too early, never too late. This taught me that victory, like the movement of shadows, has its own natural rhythm that cannot be forced but must be recognized and seized in combat. Timing matters more than strength, more than speed, more than technique. I have seen powerful warriors lose to weaker opponents because they struck at the wrong moment. I have seen fast swordsmen defeated by slower ones who understood when to move. The warrior who masters timing controls the entire flow of battle. There are 3 types of timing in any confrontation. First is go no sen, responding after your opponent attacks. This is defensive timing, the choice of most warriors because it feels safer. Second is tai no sen, attacking simultaneously with your opponent. This requires confidence and creates mutual risk. Third, and most powerful, is sen no sen, seizing the initiative before your opponent can even begin their attack. I mastered sen no sen through years of studying the rhythm of human intention. Every action begins with a thought, and every thought creates a subtle, physical preparation. I learned to recognize the moment when an opponent decided to attack before their body began to move. By striking in that precise instant, I could defeat them with their own intention. During my famous duel on Ganru Island, I demonstrated perfect timing by arriving deliberately late. Sasaki Kojiro was a master of technique, famous for his extraordinarily long sword and his swallow-cut technique. But I understood that his greatest strength could become his greatest weakness if I controlled the timing of our encounter. By arriving late, I disrupted his mental preparation and forced him to wait in a state of heightened readiness. This waiting created tension and impatience that affected his natural rhythm. When we finally fought, his timing was off because I had taken control of the entire temporal framework of our duel. The battle was won before it began, not through superior technique, but through superior understanding of timing. In your daily challenges, learn to recognize the natural rhythm of situations. There is a time to speak and a time to remain silent. There is a time to act decisively and a time to wait patiently. There is a time to be aggressive and a time to be receptive. The warrior who forces action at the wrong time creates unnecessary resistance. The warrior who waits for the right moment achieves victory with minimal effort. Create openings rather than wait for them to appear naturally. This is the essence of sen no sen applied to modern life. In negotiations, presentations, or difficult conversations, learn to recognize when your counterpart is about to speak or act, and seize that moment to guide the interaction in your desired direction. Perfect timing transforms even disadvantageous situations into opportunities for victory. The undefeated mind doesn't just react to timing, it creates timing. Every samurai in Japan was taught to fight with one sword. It was tradition, it was proper, it was the way things had always been done. But tradition is often the enemy of innovation, and innovation is the ally of the undefeated mind. I developed the technique of fighting with 2 swords simultaneously, the katana in my right hand, the wakizashi in my left. This was not just a different fighting style, it was a complete transformation of how the mind approaches problems. When I first attempted to use both swords, my movements were clumsy and uncoordinated. My brain was wired to think in terms of single-weapon combat. I had to literally rewire my neural pathways to think in multiple dimensions simultaneously. This process taught me something profound about mental flexibility that applies far beyond swordsmanship. Most people approach challenges with single solution, thinking they see one path forward, one strategy, one way of understanding a problem. But the 2-sword mind operates differently. It holds multiple approaches simultaneously, ready to employ whichever is most appropriate for the moment. When my right-hand sword was blocked, my left-hand sword was already in position to strike. When one strategy failed, another was immediately available. The mental discipline required to master dual weapon combat was extraordinary. I had to train my brain to coordinate different rhythms, different distances, different techniques simultaneously. My right hand might be defending while my left hand attacked. My katana might be creating distance while my wakizashi moved in close. This trained my mind to think in terms of paradox and contradiction rather than simple linear logic. This mental ambidexterity became one of my greatest advantages. While opponents focused on countering one line of attack, they were vulnerable to the other. While they prepared for traditional technique, they were unprepared for innovation. The two-sword style was not just physically unpredictable, it was mentally disorienting to face. In your modern challenges, developed this same mental flexibility. When negotiating, have multiple strategies ready simultaneously. When solving problems, consider contradictory approaches that might work in parallel. When facing opposition, maintain both aggressive and defensive options. Don't limit yourself to the traditional single-solution approach that most people use. I learned to train both hands equally, so that neither was dominant and both were capable. This physical symmetry created mental symmetry, the ability to see situations from multiple perspectives simultaneously without favoring one over another. Most people have a dominant way of thinking, a preferred approach to problems. The two-sword mind eliminates such preferences and maintains complete tactical flexibility. The kata I developed for two-sword fighting required me to think in layers. The surface layer was the immediate technique being executed. The middle layer was the setup for the next combination. The deep layer was the overall strategic flow of the entire encounter. Operating on these multiple levels simultaneously expanded my mental capacity beyond what single sword training could achieve. This is how you develop an undefeated mind in any field. Refuse to limit yourself to traditional approaches. Train your ability to hold contradictory truths simultaneously, and always maintain multiple options for achieving your objectives. I discovered the power of unpredictability during a training session where I deliberately shattered my wooden practice targets in irregular patterns. As I watched the pieces fall in random directions, I realized that predictability is a weapon your enemies can use against you. From that moment, I began developing what I call the art of broken rhythm, the strategic use of irregularity to maintain tactical advantage. Every warrior develops patterns. They have favorite techniques, preferred distances, comfortable rhythms. These patterns become their signature, but they also become their vulnerability. When you establish a predictable pattern, you give your opponent the ability to anticipate your next move. I learned to recognize my own patterns and deliberately break them at crucial moments. In one memorable duel, I faced an opponent who had studied my previous fights. He knew my techniques, my preferred strategies, my usual timing. For the first part of our battle, I fought exactly as he expected, using my normal rhythm, my standard approaches. He began to anticipate my movements and counter them effectively. But just as he grew confident in his ability to read me, I completely changed my rhythm. Where I had been fast, I became slow. Where I had been defensive, I became aggressive. Where I had been precise, I became wild. This sudden shift broke his mental model of how to fight me, and in his confusion, I found my opening. The key insight is this: establishing patterns makes you powerful, but breaking patterns makes you unpredictable. Most people understand only the first half of this equation. They develop routines, master techniques, create systematic approaches to their challenges. This is good and necessary, but they forget that others are studying these patterns and learning to counter them. In your career, your relationships, your personal development, You must master both sides of this principle. Develop your reliable methods and consistent approaches. These give you a foundation of competence. But also cultivate the ability to completely abandon these methods when the situation calls for it. The competitor who only knows your usual strategies is unprepared for your unusual ones. I trained myself to fight effectively with irregular timing, unexpected techniques, and sudden changes of pace. Some days I would practice moving twice as fast as normal. Other days I would fight in slow motion. I would switch weapons mid-battle, change my stance without warning, attack from impossible angles. This training kept my mind flexible and my opponents guessing. Routine thinking creates mental ruts that limit your options. When you always approach problems the same way, you become blind to alternative solutions. When you always respond to challenges with the same emotional pattern, you become predictable to those who would manipulate you. The art of broken rhythm keeps your mind sharp and your options open. Use surprise and irregularity as weapons in your daily challenges. When others expect you to react emotionally, respond with calm logic. When they expect careful deliberation, act with decisive speed. When they expect conventional solutions, offer creative alternatives. Keep them off balance by refusing to be categorized or predicted. The undefeated mind never becomes a prisoner of its own patterns. In the mountains of Kyushu, I found a cave where I spent months in solitary meditation, sitting beside a smooth stone that became my anchor to the present moment. During these periods of deep contemplation, I discovered what we call mushin, the mind without mind, the state of consciousness that operates beyond thought. This became the ultimate expression of the undefeated mind. Most warriors believe that more thinking leads to better performance. They analyze every technique, plan every strategy, calculate every possibility. But I learned that there comes a point where thinking becomes the enemy of action. In the heat of combat, when life and death are decided in fractions of seconds, conscious thought is too slow. The mind that thinks is the mind that hesitates, and hesitation in combat means death. Machine is not the absence of awareness. It is awareness so complete that it transcends the need for conscious processing. When I achieved this state, my body moved with perfect technique without my mind directing it. My sword found its target without my eyes guiding it. My responses flowed naturally from the situation without my thoughts planning them. This was not magic or mysticism. It was the result of training so thorough that conscious control became unnecessary. I spent countless hours practicing the same techniques until they became automatic. Not just physically automatic, but mentally automatic. The movement from seeing an opening to exploiting it happened without the delay of conscious decision. My unconscious mind, trained through repetition and discipline, could execute perfect technique faster than my conscious mind could even recognize the need for it. This state of no mind gave me an enormous advantage in combat. While opponents were thinking about what to do next, I was already doing it. While they were processing information and making decisions, I was responding from a level of awareness that operated below conscious thought. They were fighting with their thinking minds. I was fighting with my entire being unified in purposeful action. The difference between thinking about action and pure action is the difference between watching a river flow and being the river. When you think about riding a bicycle, you wobble and fall. When you simply ride, you flow effortlessly. When you think about having a conversation, you stumble over words. When you simply communicate, your thoughts flow naturally into speech. To achieve mushin in your daily challenges, you must first master the fundamentals so thoroughly that they become unconscious. Whether you're giving presentations, leading meetings, or handling difficult conversations, practice until your responses become natural rather than calculated. Train until your best self emerges automatically under pressure rather than requiring conscious effort to maintain. The empty mind is not passive, it is the most active state possible, because it operates without the friction of self-doubt, without the delay of overthinking, without the interference of conscious control. It is the mind that has trained itself so well that it no longer needs to try. This is the ultimate goal of the undefeated mind, to operate with such mastery that victory becomes as natural as breathing. I once studied the aftermath of the great battle of Sekigahara, walking the fields where armies had clashed and examining how positioning determined the outcome before a single arrow was fired. The generals who chose superior positions won decisively over those with larger forces but inferior placement. This taught me that where you stand determines the outcome before the fighting begins. In single combat, I learned to control every aspect of positioning, distance, angle, height, background, and even the direction of sunlight. During my duel with Sasaki Kojiro, I deliberately positioned myself so that the morning sun would be in his eyes at the crucial moment. I chose the timing of our encounter to coincide with the tide that would limit his movement on the beach. These were not accidents. They were strategic choices that gave me multiple advantages before we crossed swords. Physical positioning is only the beginning. Psychological positioning is far more powerful. When I faced opponents, I would arrive in a way that established my mental dominance from the first moment. Sometimes this meant arriving early to claim the best ground. Sometimes it meant arriving late to create tension and urgency. Sometimes it meant arriving exactly on time to demonstrate perfect control. Each choice was calculated to put my opponent at a psychological disadvantage. Distance control became one of my signature advantages. Most swordsmen have an optimal fighting distance where their techniques work best. I learned to recognize this distance for each opponent and then systematically deny it to them while maintaining my own preferred range. If they were most dangerous up close, I would keep them at medium range. If they excelled at long distance, I would close the gap. By controlling the distance, I controlled which techniques could be used and when the environmental advantages must be created, not just recognized. During one famous duel, I chose to fight near a cliff edge, but positioned myself so that my opponent's natural retreat would take him toward the precipice. His unconscious awareness of this danger behind him created a subtle forward pressure that limited his movement options and eventually led to his defeat. The cliff became my ally without ever coming into play directly. In your modern challenges, learn to think strategically about positioning in every interaction. In meetings, choose where you sit to maximize your influence and visibility. In negotiations, control the timing, location, and framework of discussions to your advantage. In conflicts, position yourself as the reasonable party while forcing others into defensive or aggressive stances that make them look bad. Taking the center is both a physical and metaphysical concept. Physically, controlling the center line in combat gives you the shortest path to your target while forcing opponents to take longer, more complicated routes. Metaphysically, taking the center means becoming the point around which everything else revolves. When you control the center of any situation, others must react to you rather than forcing you to react to them. The undefeated mind never accepts disadvantageous positioning. It constantly works to improve its strategic position, turning weaknesses into strengths and creating advantages from neutral situations. Position is power, and power flows to those who understand how to claim and maintain it. Near the end of my life, I wrote the Decode, The Way of Walking Alone, a collection of 21 precepts that captured the essence of complete self-reliance. This was not born from misanthropy or pride, but from the recognition that the undefeated mind must be complete unto itself. When you depend on others for your strength, confidence, or direction, you create vulnerabilities that can be exploited in critical moments. I chose the path of walking alone, not because I disliked people, but because I understood that mental invincibility requires internal authority. When your sense of worth depends on others' approval, when your confidence relies on external validation, when your decisions require consensus, you have given away the very independence that makes victory possible. The warrior who needs permission to act has already been defeated by his own dependencies. This principle was tested repeatedly throughout my wandering years. There were times when I could have joined powerful dojo, accepted patronage from wealthy lords, or built alliances with other warriors. Each of these choices would have brought immediate benefit, security, resources, social status, but each would also have required me to consider others' opinions, follow others' rules, and compromise my own judgment for the sake of harmony or politics. Instead, I chose complete self-reliance. I made my own decisions based on my own analysis. I accepted responsibility for all consequences, both positive and negative. I developed my own techniques rather than copying established schools. I formed my own philosophy rather than adopting traditional teachings. This path was more difficult, but it created a strength that could never be taken away, because it came entirely from within. The mental strength that comes from needing no one's approval is extraordinary. When you know that, you can survive and thrive regardless of what others think, say, or do. You operate from a position of genuine freedom. You can speak truth without fear of rejection. You can take necessary risks without requiring encouragement. You can make difficult decisions without seeking consensus. This doesn't mean isolation or arrogance. I had friends, students, and allies throughout my life, but these relationships were choices, not dependencies. I engaged with others from strength, not need. I offered value without expecting anything in return, and I received help without becoming dependent on it. This approach attracted loyal friends and repelled those who would seek to use or manipulate me. In critical moments, whether facing a deadly opponent or making a life-changing decision, you must be able to rely completely on your own judgment and strength. If you have trained yourself to need external validation, you will hesitate when quick action is required. If you have built your confidence on others' opinions, you will falter when those opinions are withdrawn or turned against you. The discipline of making decisions without external validation builds what I call inner authority. This is different from stubbornness or refusal to listen to advice. Inner authority means that after considering all available information and perspectives, you trust your own judgment to make the final decision and accept full responsibility for the outcome. Train yourself to be complete unto itself. The undefeated mind walks alone, not out of loneliness, but out of strength. During a duel in Edo, my opponent attempted to blind me by reflecting sunlight off a polished mirror hidden in his sleeve. As I struck the mirror and shattered it, I realized that this moment represented something far deeper than a simple combat trick. The broken mirror became my symbol for the necessity of cutting through illusion to see reality clearly. Most defeats come not from superior opponents, but from fighting illusions instead of actual threats. In combat, deception is everywhere. Opponents use feints to make you defend against attacks that never come. They create false openings to lure you into traps. They project confidence when they feel doubt, aggression when they feel fear. The warrior who responds to these illusions instead of underlying reality will be defeated by his own misconceptions rather than his opponent's skill. I learned to distinguish between what appears to be happening and what is actually happening. This required training my perception to look beyond surface movements and emotional displays to see the true intentions and capabilities underneath. Most people see what they expect to see or what others want them to see. The undefeated mind sees what is actually there. Fear creates more illusions than any opponent ever could. When you are afraid, every shadow becomes a threat. Every uncertainty becomes a catastrophe. Every challenge becomes insurmountable. Fear magnifies problems, multiplies dangers, and creates obstacles that exist only in your imagination. I spent years learning to separate real dangers from imaginary ones, actual problems from projected fears. The mental clarity needed to see through false threats comes from rigorous self-examination. Most of the battles you fight are against enemies that exist only in your mind. Most of the obstacles you face are projections of your own insecurities. Most of the limitations you accept are self-imposed rather than externally enforced. Until you learn to distinguish between real and imaginary barriers, you will waste energy fighting ghosts while real opportunities pass you by. During my training in mountain caves, I practiced meditation techniques designed to strip away mental illusions. I would sit in complete darkness until my mind stopped creating phantom images. I would fast until my body stopped generating phantom hungers. I would remain silent until my thoughts stopped generating phantom conversations. Through this process, I learned to perceive reality without the distorting filters of expectation, assumption, and projection. Self-deception is the most dangerous enemy of the undefeated mind. It is easier to blame external circumstances than to acknowledge personal weaknesses. It is more comfortable to believe you are a victim of bad luck than to admit you made poor decisions. It is less threatening to assume others are holding you back than to recognize you are holding yourself back. But these comfortable lies prevent you from accessing your true strength. Cutting through illusion requires brutal honesty about your own capabilities, motivations, and circumstances. You must see yourself as you actually are, not as you wish you were or fear you might be. You must assess situations based on facts, not hopes or fears. You must recognize the difference between what you can control and what you cannot. The warrior who sees clearly wins before the battle begins, because he fights only real enemies and solves only actual problems. In my later years, I took up painting and calligraphy, using the same brush to create both delicate cherry blossoms and bold mountain landscapes. This practice taught me that mastery requires the ability to embody completely different energies. As the situation demands, I learned to be like water when water was needed, and like fire when fire was required. The undefeated mind is not rigid in its approach, is supremely adaptable. Water is patient, persistent, and seemingly gentle, yet it can wear down the hardest stone and find a way around any obstacle. When I faced opponents who were aggressive and forceful, I would become like water yielding to their attacks, flowing around their strength, finding the weak points in their defenses. I would appear to retreat while actually positioning myself for a decisive counterattack. This water-like approach frustrated aggressive fighters because they had nothing solid to strike against. Fire is intense, direct, and overwhelming. When I faced opponents who were defensive and cautious, I would become like fire attacking with such speed and ferocity that they had no time to think or plan. I would press forward relentlessly, giving them no opportunity to recover their composure or execute their preferred techniques. This fire-like approach overwhelmed careful fighters because it destroyed their ability to control the pace and distance of combat. The key insight is knowing which energy the situation requires. Some challenges demand the patient persistence of water, others require the explosive force of fire. Most people have a preferred approach. They are naturally more water-like or fire-like, and they try to use this same energy in every situation. This is a weakness that can be exploited by someone who understands how to match energy to circumstance. I learned to read the energy of situations and respond with the appropriate opposite. When facing chaos and confusion, I would become calm and methodical like still water. When facing rigid structure and bureaucracy, I would become dynamic and unpredictable like wildfire. When others were being emotional, I would become logical. When others were being overly rational, I would become intuitive and spontaneous. This flexibility required me to develop the full spectrum of mental and emotional states. I could not just train my natural tendencies, I had to cultivate abilities that felt foreign and uncomfortable. The naturally aggressive warrior must learn patience and subtlety. The naturally defensive warrior must learn boldness and initiative. Complete mastery means having access to all possibilities, not just your preferred ones, in your modern challenges. Observe the energy that others are bringing to each situation and consciously choose the complementary response. In meetings where everyone is speaking quickly and loudly, slow down and speak softly. Your voice will carry more weight. In negotiations where others are being aggressive, become calm and patient. Your composure will give you the advantage. In conflicts where others are being emotional, become rational and factual. Your clarity will prevail. The spirit of fire and water is not about being unpredictable for its own sake. It is about having the wisdom to match your response to what the situation actually requires, rather than what feels most natural to you. This adaptability makes you nearly impossible to defeat, because opponents cannot prepare for a specific approach. They must be ready for anything. One of my most famous victories came when I carved an oar into an oversized wooden sword and used it to defeat Sasaki Kojiro, whose own sword was renowned for being the longest in Japan. This was not a gimmick or desperate was a calculated psychological and tactical strategy that demonstrated the power of redefining the rules of engagement to your advantage. Kojiro had built his entire reputation around his exceptionally long sword and his famous swallow cut technique. Every opponent he faced had to adapt to his weapon's superior reach, fighting at a disadvantage from the moment combat began. But I understood that his greatest strength could become his greatest weakness if I refused to play by the established rules. By creating an even longer weapon, I not only neutralized his reach advantage, but reversed it completely. More importantly, I created a psychological shock that disrupted his entire mental framework for the battle. He had spent years perfecting techniques based on being the longer weapon. Suddenly, he was forced to adapt to being the shorter weapon, using strategies. He had never needed to develop. The mental impact of doing the unexpected in any confrontation cannot be overstated. When you force others to abandon their prepared strategies and adapt to your innovations, you gain an enormous advantage, because they are operating outside their area of expertise, while you are implementing your own chosen approach. This principle extends far beyond weapon selection. In business negotiations, instead of accepting the other party's proposed framework, introduce your own structure that highlights your strengths. In personal conflicts, instead of defending against accusations, redirect the conversation to address the underlying issues from your perspective. In competitive situations, instead of trying to beat others at their own game, create a new game where your unique advantages become decisive. I learned that playing by others' rules is often a form of voluntary disadvantage. Every established system, every traditional approach, every normal way of doing things benefits some people more than others. When you automatically accept these frameworks, you may be accepting a position of weakness without realizing it. Creating your own advantages through innovative thinking requires you to question assumptions that others take for granted. Why must sword fights be conducted with standard weapons? Why must negotiations follow conventional patterns? Why must problems be solved using traditional methods? The warrior who asks these questions and acts on alternative answers gains access to strategies that others never consider. The key is not to be different for the sake of being different, but to be strategic about when and how you introduce unconventional approaches. The element of surprise is a finite resource. Once you use an innovative strategy, others will learn to counter it. But if you develop the mental habit of continuously creating new advantages, you stay ahead of those who merely react to your innovations. Use creativity as a weapon in your daily challenges. When others expect conventional responses, provide innovative solutions. when they prepare for traditional approaches, introduce unexpected methods. The undefeated mind never accepts the limitations that others assume are permanent. I carried a seppuku blade for most of my adult life, not because I sought death, but because I had removed the option of surrender from my mental repertoire. This was not mere bravado or theatrical gesture. It was a profound psychological commitment that transformed how I approached every challenge. When retreat is not an option, advance becomes the only possibility. The death before dishonor mind is not about reckless disregard for life. It is about complete commitment to victory that eliminates the mental energy wasted on escape plans, backup strategies, and hedged bets. When you remove the option of surrender from your consciousness, you discover reserves of strength and creativity that remain hidden as long as retreat seems possible. I have seen many skilled warriors lose battles not because they lacked ability, but because they fought with one foot already pointed toward the exit. They held back their best techniques in case they needed them later. They conserved energy in case the fight lasted longer than expected. They maintained emotional distance in case defeat became inevitable. This divided commitment created divided attention, and divided attention creates vulnerability. The commitment to victory changes your mental state completely. When failure is literally not an option, your mind stops generating scenarios of defeat and focuses entirely on paths to success. When you cannot afford to lose, you discover strategies and resources that you never knew existed. The brain that knows it must win operates differently than the brain that hopes to win. During my most dangerous duels, I would make a silent commitment. Before drawing my sword, I will leave this place victorious, or I will not leave at all. This was not a death wish, it was a victory guarantee. By removing the possibility of defeat from my mental landscape, I freed my entire consciousness to focus on the single objective of winning. This principle requires careful application in modern life. You cannot approach every challenge with literally life or death commitment. That would be both impractical and exhausting. But you can apply this mindset to the challenges that truly matter. When you decide that something is genuinely important, career goal, a relationship, a personal standard, to it completely, remove the backup plans that allow you to give less than your best effort. The difference between fighting to win and fighting not to lose is the difference between offense and defense as mental postures. When you fight to win, you take initiative, create opportunities, and maintain forward momentum. When you fight not to lose, you react to others' initiatives, wait for opportunities, and focus on avoiding mistakes rather than achieving breakthroughs. Burning bridges behind you creates unstoppable forward momentum. When you cannot go back, you must go forward. When you cannot settle for less, you must achieve more. When you cannot accept mediocrity, you must pursue excellence. This commitment generates the energy and focus necessary for extraordinary achievement. The power that comes from having no backup plan is the power of complete dedication. Every ounce of mental and physical energy flows in the same direction. There is no internal conflict between advancing and retreating, no hesitation between commitment and preservation. The unified mind is the undefeated mind. In my later years, I began accepting students and discovered that teaching deepened my own understanding of the warrior's path in ways that solitary practice never could. When I handed a young samurai his first wooden training sword and watched him struggle with basic forms, I realized that explaining principles to others forced me to understand them more completely than I ever had while using them instinctively. Teaching revealed gaps in my knowledge that I never knew existed. When a student asked why I moved my foot in a particular way during a technique, I had to examine my own actions consciously for the first time. I discovered that many of my most effective strategies were unconscious adaptations that I had never fully analyzed. The process of making these unconscious competencies explicit transformed them. from mere habits into transferable wisdom. The responsibility that comes with mastering the undefeated mind extends beyond personal achievement. When you have developed genuine expertise in any field, you have an obligation to share that knowledge with those who are following the same path. But this sharing must be done carefully, because the teacher's example shapes the student's understanding more than the teacher's words. I learned that I could not teach what I did not embody. Students saw through inconsistencies between my teachings and my actions immediately. If I taught the importance of mental discipline while displaying emotional volatility, they learned that the teaching was not genuine. If I taught the value of preparation while showing up unprepared, they learned that preparation was optional. The teacher's character becomes part of the curriculum, whether the teacher intends it or not. How sharing knowledge multiplies rather than diminishes. Personal power contradicts what most people believe about competitive advantage. Many warriors hoarded their techniques, fearing that teaching others would create future rivals. But I discovered the opposite. Teaching forced me to continuously improve and innovate to stay ahead of my students. The effort to remain worthy of their respect and attention drove me to deeper levels of mastery. Each student brought unique challenges that expanded my own abilities. Some were naturally aggressive and taught me to refine my defensive strategies. Others were overly cautious and forced me to develop better methods for inspiring confidence. Some learned quickly and pushed me to find advanced concepts to keep them engaged. Others struggled with basics and required me to break down complex movements into simpler components. The difference between knowing and truly understanding combat principles became clear only through teaching. I could execute perfect technique, but until I could explain why the technique worked and how to adapt it to different situations, my knowledge remained incomplete. Teaching transformed my intuitive mastery into conscious expertise that could be improved and transmitted. Building a legacy through developing other warriors created something that lasted beyond my individual achievements. My personal victories proved my skill, but my students' victories proved my understanding. When they succeeded using principles I had taught them, they validated the depth and accuracy of my knowledge in ways that my own success never could. The teacher who continues learning while teaching develops an undefeated mind that grows stronger through sharing rather than weaker through competition. In my 57th year, a young warrior arrived at my door with an invitation to duel. He was skilled, confident, and eager to make his reputation by defeating the legendary Miyamoto Musashi. For the first time in my life, I declined the challenge. This was not cowardice or weakness, was the evolution of the undefeated mind beyond the need for external validation through combat. The undefeated mind grows and transforms throughout life. What begins as a drive to prove oneself through victory eventually becomes something deeper. The wisdom to choose which battles deserve your energy and which victories are worth pursuing. I had proven everything I needed to prove through sword and strategy. Continuing to duel would have been repetition, not growth. When I declined that final challenge, I understood something profound about the nature of mastery. True strength is not measured by how many opponents you can defeat, but by how clearly you understand which fights are worth fighting. The warrior who must constantly prove his worth through combat has not yet achieved genuine confidence. The warrior who knows his worth without needing external confirmation has transcended the need for validation. This decision represented the wisdom of knowing when you have nothing left to prove. I had spent decades building an undefeated record, not for its own sake, but to develop the mental discipline and strategic understanding that would serve me in all aspects of life. Once those qualities were fully developed, continuing to duel would have been like a master calligrapher practicing basic strokes and necessary repetition rather than meaningful progress. The young warrior who challenged me could not understand my refusal. In his mind, A true warrior never turns down a challenge, but this thinking reveals an incomplete understanding of what makes a warrior truly great. The greatest victory is not defeating another person. It is mastering yourself so completely that external challenges become irrelevant to your sense of worth and identity. Transitioning from warrior to sage without losing the warrior spirit required me to find new ways to apply the principles I had developed through combat. I began focusing on painting, calligraphy, poetry, and philosophy pursuits that demanded the same mental discipline, strategic thinking, and persistent practice that had made me undefeated in combat. The warrior's mind found new challenges, worthy of its capabilities. How mastery changes the nature of challenge itself became clear as I aged. Early in my career, I sought external opponents to test my skills. In my middle years, I sought stronger opponents to develop my abilities. In my later years, I sought internal challenges that would continue my growth as a complete human being. The undefeated mind never stops growing. It simply finds worthier opponents and more meaningful victories. The ultimate victory is transcending the need for victory over others and achieving victory over your own limitations, fears, and weaknesses. When you reach this level of development, external challenges become opportunities for expression rather than tests of worth. You engage not because you need to prove anything, but because you choose to share your mastery with the world. As I completed my final work, the Book of Five Rings, I realized that everything I had learned through decades of combat had prepared me for something greater than victory in duels. The strategic mind that had made me undefeated in battle became the foundation for mastery in every aspect of human existence. The way of strategy is not limited to warfare. It is the way of living with complete awareness, deliberate action, and unshakable purpose. When I turned my warrior's discipline toward artistic pursuits, I discovered that painting required the same mental qualities that had served me in combat. The brushstroke that captures the essence of a mountain demands the same decisive precision as the sword cut that ends a duel. The timing that creates perfect composition in art follows the same principles as the timing that creates victory. In battle, the patience required to develop artistic skill mirrors the persistence needed to master combat techniques. In poetry, I found that choosing the perfect word required the same strategic thinking I had used to choose the perfect moment to attack. Each syllable had to serve the overall purpose, just as each movement in combat had to contribute to victory. The economy of language that makes poetry powerful reflected the economy of motion that makes swordsmanship effective. Waste nothing, and every element serves the whole. My study of tea ceremony revealed that the way of strategy applies even to the most peaceful activities. The host's awareness of each guest's needs, the precise timing of each movement, the creation of harmony through careful attention to detail. These required the same mindful presence that had guided me through countless duels. The difference was that instead of defeating opponents, I was creating beauty and fostering connection. The undefeated mind as a complete approach to existence means applying warrior principles to every decision, every relationship, every challenge you face. Whether you are negotiating a business deal, raising children, pursuing creative expression, or simply deciding how to spend your day, the same mental discipline that creates victory in combat creates excellence in living. Why mastery in one area opens mastery in all areas became clear through my diverse pursuits. The concentration developed through sword training enhanced my ability to focus during meditation. The strategic thinking learned through combat improved my approach to artistic composition. The emotional control required for dueling helped me maintain equanimity in all circumstances. True mastery creates transferable capabilities that enhance every aspect of life. Your path forward with the principles I have shared begins with choosing one area where you will apply the undefeated mind completely. Whether it is your career, your relationships, your health, or your personal development. Commit to approaching it with the same mental discipline that I brought to combat. Master the fundamentals. Eliminate the option of surrender. Maintain strategic awareness, and persist until you achieve victory. The challenge to remain undefeated in your own battles is not about winning every encounter, but about maintaining the warrior spirit regardless of circumstances. Sometimes you will face setbacks, make mistakes, or encounter opponents stronger than yourself. The undefeated mind views these experiences not as defeats, but as information that improves future strategy. As I near the end of my life, I leave you with this final understanding. The way of strategy is the way of life itself. Every day presents opportunities to apply these principles. Every challenge offers a chance to strengthen your undefeated mind. Every interaction allows you to practice the warrior's discipline. Carry this wisdom into your modern world, and you will discover that the same principles that made me invincible in ancient Japan can make you unstoppable in whatever battles you choose to fight.